So if we just construct this in a really simplistic way, let's make a couple functions. So we'll make a API call function. So we're going to sort of pretend this is like a fetch API response. And all this is going to do is it's going to return some JSON. And JSON is a string. So we know what the shape of this data is going to be. Data, ID, ID is 1, type is random, attributes, sorry, these are all, it's not the same as JavaScript. Attributes, it's going to have a value, and the value is going to be some kind of random number. So let's get the random number here. Const output, or random number equals, I can never remember a good way to generate. Thank you.
Small.
Okay, let's say it's between 0. And let's just say,
Is that return string or string? What's that like?
yeah, well, I mean, anytime you hit an API, it's going to give you string back. So
Not
it's
just a straight object?
Nope. The web doesn't deal in objects. The web deals in strings. So it's your job to parse that stuff, and so it's going to give you a JSON formatted string, and then it's your job to parse it and extract the data out of it. So let's say max is 100. Max. Okay. Okay. All right, so let's finish our job here. Random number. Close out this. Close out that. Close out that. Does anybody? Oh, you haven't seen a template literal? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's what I was asking.
Yes.
Was that
Let's talk about template literals. Yes. Sorry, everybody. Okay. Yeah. JavaScript ECMAScript version 2016 or 2015 has template literals. So yeah. So foo equals 12. Yeah, it's very similar to what Python has. Bar equals ABC. Console.log. Foo is foo. Oops, sorry, did it wrong. Foo. Bar is bar. You use backticks to do it. That's it. So when you want to replace things, you just, and that can be arbitrary JavaScript. So you can go, foo times 2, do stuff like that. Right. So all I'm trying to do here is basically have an API that returns, JSON. Essentially, what I'm doing is something like this. I'm doing a constant. So output is this object. This is a particular format of output. So I didn't pull this out of the air. This is called JSON API. If you're not familiar with it, there's a standard on this thing. You can go look it up. But it's how most REST API should be built. So there's other things besides data that can go into this, but data needs to be there. So this is the output that I want to come from the JSON API, but it's a string. So output.string, JSON.stringify. So that's the thing that I was trying to have the API generate. Hopefully I didn't make any mistakes. But I want to have it sticky in the actual random number. So we're just basically trying to simulate an API call. So we're going to hit API call. We're going to get back a string. So the first thing we do is hit the API call. We have the string. Next thing we want to do is parse it. So function, JSON parser. We're going to give it a input string. We're going to return JSON.parse input string. Okay. Then we want to pull out the value. So function get the value. And now, so this thing returns an actual object that we can do stuff with. So this is my server response object. And yeah, and in truth, I guess the other thing to talk about is an API call doesn't usually return just the payload. It returns a more complicated object. Usually you've got like a status is 200. You've got a body. You've got stuff like this. So there's more things in a JSON API response. So let's make it more realistic. So the JSON parser is only interested in the body. We want to parse that body. Maybe we also want to verify that we got a 200 status back. So let's just say, let's take the whole response object. Let's verify that the response status is equal to 200, and we'll return the parsed response.body. Try to make it a little more realistic. All right, then we want to parse the actual response that we got. And, sorry, ASLint disable, no console. All right, so now we want to parse the response, or we just return this response we got. So return server response object dot data 0 value, attributes value. Okay, so now we want to put this all together. So const value1 equals API call. So we're going to take the API call. That's going to be, we want to parse that value, JSON parser, and we want to get the value out of it. All right. Console data assert. We'll just do it this way. If response dot status is not equal to 200, throw new error, invalid response code. So we'll use exceptions instead. To continue to introduce other potential problems, like maybe half the time this doesn't return 200 code. Maybe half the time the data isn't exactly in the format that we want to. So we have to be a little bit defensive. But let's just get this part done, and we'll get to introducing more potential problems so we can be as realistic as possible. So, all right. So let's just run it. Yeah, I screwed up the JSON. Oh, because I didn't put a brace in front of it. I think that's why. Data needs quotes. Good call. I made all these mistakes so you guys could catch me. Sweet. Look, that's the most complicated way you can get a random number conceivably possible. All right, so let's do it twice. We got value 1, we got value 2, and let's sum them together. Sweet. All right, great. So, I mean, so the reality of this is that this actually takes a long time, or it takes. You can't do this synchronously, right? We wrote this in just the really brain dead synchronous approach where everything is just instantaneously being returned. But the truth is that this all takes time. So now we're going to introduce asynchronicity to this whole thing and make it extremely complicated. And we're going to do it in 3 ways. We're going to start with callbacks. we're going to move to promises, and then we're going to move to async and await. So the first thing we want to do is introduce a callback to this thing. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to say this is going to take a while. So I'm going to use the setTimeout function to introduce asynchronicity. So this is now going to take 500 milliseconds. And bam, there we go. Actually, I need to make this an anonymous function. There we go. So now this takes time. So what does the API call function return? Yep, it returns undefined. So when I call API call and that returns undefined, JSON parser is going to get nothing, and this is going to break immediately. So we run this, and it's unhappy. It can't find response.status. So response.status doesn't exist because the API call function no longer returns anything. How do we deal with this situation? Yeah. Yeah. So let's pass it a function. So now we can go call instead of a return inside here because nobody cares about the return of setTimeout. So I'm going to do callback of this instead. And ESLint's mad because it doesn't like the callback. I don't know why. Doesn't like the term callback. No callback literal. No, don't worry, we won't be using this in the future. Okay. How do we? So let's pull this stuff apart down here before we get going, and just into its component parts, just so we can get at it a little better. So we're going to say, So value equals API call. So like this is response 1 equals API call, and then we're going to be like parsed data equals JSON parser of response 1, parse data 1, and then we're going to be like I guess random number 1 equals get the value of parse data 1. All right. So I'm just gonna let this stuff be cool. Okay, and then console.log random1. All right. So how do we finish the job here? Yeah.
I don't know what would be better. We just need to start writing a new function inside of it.
Let's write a dang function.
Yeah.
All right.
And then the first part of that, it needs to take in one argument, right? It needs to take in
Response.
response. Because that's what callback is doing up there. It's calling the function that we give it with one argument, which is that dictionary.
Yep. Right. So this between these two braces. Let's look at it this way. Let's say if I define a function foo, it's going to take a callback, and I'm just going to say callback 12 or 120. Done. So function foo takes a callback, and it calls it back with that value. Then I go foo, and I'm going to hand it a function. Okay, and I could hand it console.log, for example. I'm just going to hand it that function, and it's going to, and it goes, okay, console.log. I got console.log. I'm going to plug it in here. Console.log 120. I just printed 120. Let's do foo value console.log value plus 100. There we go. So I can hand it whatever function I want to. I can give it the function itself here, or I can give it a little anonymous function that it can run, and it'll do whatever I want. I can make it a great big function. I can go, function my super great callback value.
I just don't get.
So there's another way of defining a function. My super great callback is a function. And if I call my super great callback with 100, I'm going to get 200. We've done that all day long. So now I can go foo of my super great callback, and it operates the same way. Because I've defined foo in such a way that it takes whatever callback I give it and hands 120 to it as an argument. So I can define it anonymously, or I can define it with a named way, but these are equivalent. This is the essence of functional programming, where we get used to passing functions around as arguments to things. Function bar equals, function bar callback 120. That's all it is. So now if I go bar of 1, if I go bar of 1, what will that do? That will error. Because 1 is not a function. I can't go 1 of 120. That doesn't make sense. But I go bar of console.log, and it'll print it. It'll use that console.log as the function that's getting called back. I've got to be able to call it. Whatever I pass into bar I got to be able to go console.log open close. If I can't put the open close parenthesis at the end of it, it's not a function. Right? So if I go const my primitive callback equals, now I've turned it into a function. That does absolutely nothing, but I can call it. It's like, okay, great, I don't care. But now I can go bar of my primitive callback. It's like, sure, I'll take that. I didn't error. It didn't give me my primitive callback is not a function. It called it, and my primitive callback just threw it away, which is fine. I mean, this is done all the time in JavaScript. This callback passing stuff. This is very, very common. This isn't like cutting edge JavaScript stuff. So the question is then, if we're now going to pass a function into API call, so that we can do something with the value. I'm just going to go ahead and code it up. We now have a response. We're then basically going to take this stuff and shove it in here, right? So now, yeah, and then log rand number, exactly. Console.log rand number. I'm sorry, say again? Oh yeah, still parse data. You're right. Well, it doesn't matter because it's got less scope. But yeah, now it's going to be more interesting when we want to add two things together. Yeah. Because we have to do the API call again. So one thing we could do.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say you could just, if you knew how many you wanted, like only 2, you could break off the API call again and return something.
You can
make a second API call.
Sure.
And have it return the value.
API call.
Oh, God.
Response 2. Great, let's go.
Yeah, and then what is that?
Let's take some more of this crap. Stick it in here. This is parse data 2 now. Response 2. Rand number 2. Console.log. random number 1 plus random number 2. Super delightful. So you can see this, if we kept going with this, it starts indenting and indenting and indenting.
That's silliness.
And that's called the pyramid of doom. So, and you could see it took a second, right? Because each of those calls to API call took 500 milliseconds to complete. And so, you know, we talked about the event loop before, like it executed all this code immediately. But then the timeout had to wait, and so after 500 milliseconds passed, it called the callback. So we got into this code, and then it called API call again, and then had to wait for the 500 milliseconds for the response to call.